Master, you are now dismissing your servant in peace, according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the presence of all peoples. Please be seated. One of the most challenging aspects of parenting over the past 7 months has been balancing expectations and reality. It happens on a daily basis. We expect that Francis will take his first nap around 9 a.m. And some days it's 9:45 and he hasn't gone down and shows no real interest in sleeping. We expect that he'll eat his butternut squash enthusiastically, just like he did yesterday. And suddenly he's screaming because all he wants to do is chew on his spoon and couldn't care less about the bowl of food in front of him. We expect him to put himself to sleep, just like he has for the past month or two. And then suddenly it's 10:30 p.m. and I'm still holding him because he won't stay asleep in his crib. Those daily expectations expand to larger scales. We expect he'll gain a certain amount of weight by his check-in next month, and then are disappointed when he doesn't quite hit that mark. We expect a smooth progression through all the various developmental stages, just as they're laid out in the many, many books you can read on parenting, and are left defeated when he hits a regression of any kind. It seems like whenever we think we know just what to expect, the whole foundation crumbles underneath us. I'm sure none of you can relate to that. The hardest expectations to keep in check are the ones that extend farther out into the future. I remember before he was born, Nicole and I received so many comments that went to the effect of, "Your child is going to have such good hair." That may be one case where the expectation was right. He has a pretty amazing head of hair for a 7-month-old. But we've heard all kinds of other projections about what Francis will look like and who he will be. He's going to be tall. He's definitely got your build. He's so observant. He's going to be so smart. And then I find myself projecting my own hopes, desires, dreams, wishes, unfulfilled life plans, whatever, onto him. I hope that he'll enjoy some of the same things that I do, that someday we'll go on runs together. I can't wait to take him hiking and share with him the books I love, and that he'll be interested in the same ones. We'll have these great conversations about Russian novels or whatever. I picture him sharing my interests, intelligent in the same ways that his mother and I are. I build up the experiences that I hope that he has and my own expectations for what he'll be like. And I realize that it's more about me than him. All of these things that I'm placing on the 7-month-old who is really just mastered rolling over. They're projections of my own hopes instead of responding to who he is and who he's going to become. Knowing the expectations that I carry as a parent, I can only imagine what it was like for Mary and Joseph. And imagine the conception of a child being heralded by an angel, receiving a prophecy of Jesus' reign as the shepherds recognition of him as the Messiah. It's pretty weighty. I mean, from the beginning, Mary and Joseph were filled of these expectations who Jesus would be, who he would become. And then in our gospel today, we read about Mary and Joseph bringing Jesus to the temple 40 days after his birth, so that they could dedicate him to God, and Mary could undergo the ritual purification demanded by the Torah. As they approach the temple, a righteous and devout man, Simeon, meets them. He receives Jesus from his parents and sees the thing that others have seen. He holds in his arms the one who would bring salvation to Israel and spread that salvation to the world. And the song he sings in response to this has been repeated in churches ever since. Master, you are now dismissing your servant in peace, according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the presence of all peoples, a light for the revelation to the Gentiles and for the glory of your people Israel. It's a song of hope and praise, full of expectation of what's to come. There's a sense of completeness to it, a confidence that all that needs to be done has been done, that Jesus is the fulfillment of what he and the nation of Israel have been waiting for. There were plenty of folks in Israel who had long awaited a Messiah, but in that they were anticipating a new king, a conqueror who would liberate them from the oppression of Roman rule and restore the sovereignty of their kingdom. Their vision of a Messiah was bound up with the glory of Israel and the building up of an earthly kingdom. And so any inkling that someone may be that Messiah would bring with it lofty expectations, that they would be a great leader, strong, powerful, clearly showing God's favor, a conqueror. And Mary and Joseph would have known these hopes. And so hearing that their son would be the Messiah, the salvation of Israel, would bring with it a tremendous weight of expectation. I can only imagine what was going through their head as they heard Simeon utter his song. But the promise of salvation that he speaks is joined by another prophecy. Simeon goes on to speak words of caution. This child is destined for the falling and rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be opposed, so that the inner thoughts of many will be revealed, and a sword will pierce your own soul too. It's a warning that the reality of who Jesus is and who he will become will not map neatly and cleanly onto the expectations of anyone in Israel. This is the first point in Luke's gospel where we get a hint that Jesus' messiahship won't be what was expected. He won't be the conqueror or the king that many in Israel thought they were waiting for. And if they aren't able to adjust their expectations, the reality of Jesus' ministry would leave them disappointed. And it's in this gap between the expectation and promise of a Messiah and the reality of Jesus' life and ministry that ultimately leads to his crucifixion. I know that my own expectations for Francis can never match the reality of who he will become. Raising him has already been and will continue to be difficult, contrary to our expectations of how things will unfold. I can't imagine fully the person who he will be, the things that he will love, the things that he'll desire for himself. I don't know what he'll look like or what he'll feel passionate about. I have no idea what he'll be good at or how he'll cultivate his talents. The reality of what his life will be is a mystery to me. But I can almost guarantee that it will undermine every single expectation and preconceived notion that I have. I know that the work ahead of me is this. It's to not let my expectations get in the way of recognizing, of seeing, of appreciating, of savoring the reality of who he is and who he is becoming. I think this is true not only of parenting, but of every relationship that matters. With people we love, children, parents, spouses, partners, friends, mentors, it's easy to build up an idealized version of the other person. It's easy to focus on our image of them, what we want and think we need them to be, who we project that they are, rather than the reality of the person that they are. I know I have those people in my life who I've set on a pedestal, who I've seen as being capable of doing no wrong. And by doing so, I fail to see them as real people, capable of making mistakes, flawed and broken as I am, as we all are. And in those cases where I've only seen this idealized version of the other, I've often been then left disappointed, heartbroken, crushed when that illusion shatters and the reality of the other doesn't live up to what my expectations have been. One of the most powerful parts to me of this gospel today is Simeon's ability to hold both his expectation for Jesus as the Messiah and the reality of the life that he will lead. He holds both the expectation and reality together. He knows that Jesus is the Savior he's waited for, but he also knows that that salvation will not look like what Israel has expected it to. It won't be triumphal, straightforward. It won't look like a conquest. It will bring division and disagreement. And it will bring heartbreak for many, and for Mary most of all. Simeon senses the conflict to come, yet he is still able to receive from God the gift of peace. He senses the gap between Israel's expectations and the reality of who Jesus will be, and yet is confident of the salvation to come. Simeon knows that it is in that gap between expectation and reality where God is most at work, where God is most present. In those places where our dreams remain unfulfilled, where our life and relationships are not what we thought they would be, God is there. We may have expectations, plans, hopes, dreams for our lives, the lives of those around us. But life will unfold in other ways. We'll be disappointed. Other folks will let us down. Things won't work out as we hope. But God is still at work in those places. God takes those broken parts of our lives, our fractured relationships, our dashed hopes, and makes them whole, redeems them, draws them deeper into the love of God. And from those broken places, new life springs forth. Wholenesses that we never could have imagined, ways of life unfolding that we never could have envisioned. But if we're able to receive and accept the reality of them, lead us to new places that we never could have foreseen. God is ever drawing us deeper into God's love. Our gospel today reminds us to hold lightly to our expectations, to know that they can never encapsulate the reality of the world unfolding around us. It invites us to encounter God in the mystery of a world that doesn't conform to our wants or expectations. A world that has brokenness, that is full of division, but one that God is always redeeming. This gospel invites us to enter the gap between reality and our expectations, and to encounter there in that space the living, loving, and life-giving God. So may we step into that gap. May we be comforted, like Simeon was, by God's love. For my eyes have seen the Savior, who has been prepared for all the world to see, a light to enlighten the nations, and the glory of our people Israel.